You're listening to the League Bound Podcast.
Coming again. Oh, mercy.
Your source for weekly coverage on the future stars of the NBA.
Gives it to Jenkins for the championship.
I'm your co-host, Jake Schrantz.
And I'm your co-host, Branden Blue.
With production for the podcast coming from Broderick Wilken.
With the first pick in the NBA draft.
Hello and welcome back to the League Bound Podcast after some time off, but today we're back breaking down the best draft prospects and some of the rising stars of the NBA today. I'm your co-host Branden Blue and I'm here with Jake and Brody. How are you guys feeling today?
Yeah, after a little bit of a Thanksgiving hiatus, I'm really glad to get back in the studio with both of you guys. And Brody, I think this is another great episode coming up.
Oh, 100%. Super excited for it. Hopefully this production stays together. It's a bit of a ragtag team today with all my equipment, but let's put on a good production. We got a lot of stuff to talk about since our last podcast, and let's start it off with negativity. I heard there was some drama.
Ooh, yeah, so...
Negativity!
Brody, I don't know if you want to pull it up or not, but...
Yeah, I'm on it.
We got Judah Mintz and Doug Edey. Now, this was from last weekend, so it's a little bit outdated, but I wanted to bring it up just because it involves a potential first-round pick. I mean, this is something I love to see out of draft prospects, guys who are hungry, who will go after that and just provide a little bit of extra energy for their team and, getting involved in a little bit of extracurricular activity.
As we pull it up here, we hang on, get rid of our League Bound logo there. It can chill out for a minute. But yeah, no, as you were saying.
All right, so let's break down this clip. So, as you can see, we have Judah, who draws a charge, and look at that. That's just, oh yeah.
All right, let's take that back.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a layup here, falls onto the ground.
But Doug is actually the one who starts it. He's a little feisty. Judah's
slapped a little
you
bit
see that
first,
right
though.
there.
But I think the funniest thing about this is that Doug is the one who ran away. How are you gonna go back in and then just start running away?
Yeah, no, that's crazy.
Fam.
Yeah, he got a little love tap on his left side, but he kind of sent that final touch to light off this whole fight.
You gotta hold your ground, Doug. I ain't gonna lie. But this is stuff I love to see. They were both ejected after this, but
Yeah, and here you go. You get the full shot here. And I'll edit it in so you guys can just see it. But, man.
Watch, he does a little slap here.
He gives him a little bit on the chin, and then he just gets, gets smacked a bit.
I love how...
He just ignores him.
Doug. He saw big number 2 coming through. He was like, oh, boy.
Judah was not fazed at all.
I mean, and a lot of coaches and media will say, oh, this is just such an immature act. But you know what? These guys just want it more.
It happens, man. It's part of basketball.
And it's fun to see Syracuse kind of get in the action here. It's been a while since Syracuse has been super relevant.
Yeah. It seems like ever since they've joined the ACC, it's just been downhill.
Downhill for them as a program, or?
Yeah. Jimmy just hasn't been able to figure it out. But
Buddy Boeheim has been basically their most relevant player in the last few years.
Hyping up a crowd that's not even his? That's crazy.
You gotta love it.
All right, yeah.
The Weekly Takes.
But getting right into the meat of the pod, we're going to start off by talking about some of the top players who came back, or at least in this upcoming class who came back. Nick Smith for Arkansas, a combo guard, and Cam Whitmore also made an appearance Saturday against Oklahoma. They were both out with injuries. Nick Smith, I believe, had an undisclosed knee injury. Cam Whitmore had a broken thumb, but they made their appearances. I think Nick played early last Tuesday, and Cam finally came in on Saturday, and it had been long awaited, and we finally get to see players who could potentially take that 3 and 4 spot in the draft when there's a lot of uncertainty after Victor and Scoot. And so, Jake, I just kind of want to get your thoughts on how having these two guys come back could really heat up the draft race.
Well, so far this year, the guy that we are going to be doing a prospect breakdown today, Brandon Miller, has been arguably kind of the biggest riser in terms of draft stock, but now we'll get to see, even though Brandon Miller's doing good, we'll see if some of these preseason top 5 guys like Nick Smith or Cam Whitmore kind of come in and start putting together a little bit of a good season so far. Cam Whitmore, he was up for contention for today's prospect breakdown, but after just one game and kind of a slow start to his season, we wanted to wait on that and get a little bit more eyes on what he's been able to do. But yeah, I mean, a lot of versatile talent in Nick Smith and Cam Whitmore. Both, I think he said, are 6'7"-ish, so pretty much prototype size for a wing or even a guard at times like Nick Smith. So really excited to see what they can do.
Yeah, I watched Nick Smith's game versus San Jose State, and I think it was interesting just to see how he was kind of managing that load. San Jose went into a zone against Arkansas, and they're not a very good three-point shooting team, so obviously they're going to struggle, and they're going to have to really find their way to score, and I think that could be a potential issue for them late in March when they're going up against some longer teams who know them a bit better. But one thing I noticed was Nick, he was a person who was just making the right basketball play. Like, there was a play where Anthony Brown was coming through the lane, and he just hit him for a alley-oop lob. Or he didn't dunk it, but I sure thought he was going to. And seeing Nick Smith make those kind of plays, he's still probably getting his knee a little bit under him still, but him just making those smart basketball IQ plays, and he was taking some shots in that zone that are probably going to, inflate or deflate his efficiency a little bit, but it really was not a bad performance from him at all. And I think, there's a lot for him going forward. Cam Whitmore as well, he didn't play a whole lot of minutes. He played like 20 minutes. He had 7 points on 3 of 7 shooting, but he showed, the potential that he has just as a big guy who can take anybody off the dribble. So I think these two, their stats are going to go up as time goes on, and these could be players we'll be talking about regularly on this podcast.
Yeah, and something that I think is going to be beneficial for Nick Smith is he's stepping into a lineup that has Anthony Black, who's already had some really big performances this year. Even Ricky Council has had some really big performances for Arkansas.
Yeah.
So while he's still coming back into his full form on the court, he should have a pretty good supporting cast to kind of supplement his early kind of games where he's still getting his game back together.
Yeah, you talked about Anthony Black. He's another big prospect. I think one thing that'll be interesting, too, is just seeing how they kind of learn to work when they both don't have the ball. Because they're going to have to share, some possessions where, maybe Anthony's bringing it up and initiating, and then other possessions Nick will be bringing it up. And even Ricky Council, he has the potential to be a guy who's just not really an orchestrator, but, he's just trying to get his bucket from the mid-range or wherever. So I think Arkansas really figuring things out. And I think they're just a fun team. They have 3 5-stars when you factor in Jordan Walsh as well. They're fast. They get up and down. I can tell they really like to play in transition. And with Nick back, that just gives you more of a passing threat and somebody who can find guys for lobs on a team that's already really athletic.
I just want to talk about Zach Edey a little bit here because we talked about him a little bit last year when we covered guys like Jaden Ivey at Purdue and some of the other guys in the Big Ten. But he's finally kind of coming into his own this season. Just a couple days ago, he had a 30-point, 20-rebound double-double. Insane stuff this early in the season versus Minnesota. And 6 of Zach's games of the 8 that he's played this year have been double-doubles. And he has 2 30-point double-doubles. I mean, this early in the season, he's got to be my player of the year so far.
Yeah, I'd have to say they were talking about all this year, all of the media, they were talking about how this is a big man's year just because you had Drew Timme, Oscar Tshiebwe, even Trace Jackson Davis, and it looked like they all were probably going to be in contention for National Player of the Year. But, people knew about Zach Edey, obviously, but I don't think anybody thought that of those 4 kind of guys, he was going to be the one who's in the lead right now. And Zach Edey, he's really doing his thing, and it's not just, him filling up the stat sheet. Purdue is, I want to say they're like, actually, let me fact check. Purdue in the AP college basketball poll right now is 5th. And, some of those other guys, they just haven't been having team success. So I think that also correction, Purdue is actually 4th. But I think him just having that team success, when you look at it, that's at the end of the day probably one of the biggest factors in who gets National Player of the Year.
Yeah, and it seems like they've finally given him the reins to the offense, which is something I'm actually pretty excited about because back with Jaden Ivey on the team and even Sasha Stefanovic at times last year, he really was kind of that third-tier offensive option in terms of who they're going to score. But this year, that has been completely different. He's been basically their go-to guy down low, getting second-chance points on the offensive glass. So, Brandon, do you think Zach Edey has potential to even make it to maybe a late first-round pick if he puts together a monster season like this?
Here's the thing. I think he definitely could put up a monster season and win National Player of the Year. But even if he does that, I think it'll be like Shibwe last year where like he might not even, or even Luka Garza in the years before where he might not even get drafted. And it's one of those things where if this were the 90s, oh yeah, he'd probably be like top 5, top 10. But it's just, I don't even want to say that he doesn't have it. It's simply just that, the way the game is played, his style of play is just undervalued and what he brings to the table because he's still a post-heavy guy, and we're seeing more and more how basketball is becoming positionless, and bigs now need to be able to stretch on both sides of the floor.
Yeah, and I mean, Zach Edey, 7'4", extremely tall player. Do you think that might even because I feel like a big difference with a lot of the other players that were big men that destroyed in college basketball but just really didn't get looked at for the NBA. I mean, they just had regular stats. This is kind of jump out of the stat sheet type height, and it can either help him or hurt him just because of the history of players that tall getting hurt, but also the fact that no one's really going to be able to contest a lot of shots that he puts up in the league, I guess, except for Victor this year. But
yeah, that's crazy that potentially in the same draft class we could get Victor getting switched on a screen against Zach Edey or something, and that would be wild on the perimeter.
I think it's crazy too how they're both freakishly tall, but they play so differently.
Yeah,
and I think that just speaks really the comparison of them just speaks to the evolution of basketball as a whole, going from post guys who just draw double teams, kick it out, or they'll just back their way down until they can get something.
Baby hook.
Yeah. So now you have guys, 7'5" guys who can create from the perimeter and
shoot one leg three.
Yeah, the game is going into a crazy place, but I'm here for it.
And if you look at Zach Edey also, in terms of weight, my guy is built 295, which is
That's
pretty
heavier
big.
than Zion.
Pretty big guy, and having muscles at that height is probably a big deal. I mean, I don't exactly know his history at Purdue. Has he had any injury?
Not
history
anything
at all?
super, I don't really remember anything being super scary.
Nothing crazy, no.
And I mean, that's something I think NBA teams might want to look at. Maybe, if they have a second round draft pick and they don't really have a lot of guys they like, you look at Zach Edey and maybe see him as a potential rotational piece that just can come off the bench and get you some boards. And
I could see a team like the Thunder kind of, if they're set with Chet Holmgren, maybe match him up off the bench, give him some bench minutes with Chet Holmgren at the 4. Don't make him kind of clang and bang down in the paint against those Joel Embiid types. Let him kind of run around on the perimeter, get open shots on a pick and pop at the power forward position.
I'm going to keep it honest. If he wants to see minutes as an NBA player, literally the only thing I think he needs to do, even just as a rotation, 6-man type guy, he could be somebody like Jonas Valanciunas or somebody, but obviously 7'4". But if he just stretched the floor and got a little bit of a 3-point shot or a mid-range game outside of just hooks and baby shots, I feel like he'd be okay. And probably when he gets drafted, he wouldn't be ready to go the minute he goes in, but I think that would help him get more minutes and raise his stock as he hits his peak.
I think I'm a little higher on Zach Edey. I would say he would be NBA ready when he goes in. There's not a lot of guys in the league that can match up 7'4", 290.
With a shot.
But I feel like you put him on the defensive end and he could easily just get played off because I don't think he really has the athleticism to stay with those. Like, say Victor. Oh, that might not be a good example. But, yeah, even Victor. Like, I feel like he could probably just take him off the dribble. And then that's not even factoring in, like, some of the smaller point guards and forwards that can dribble now. And, like, it's just a game now where he's just going to be stretched out of the paint. So it's really hard for me to see a situation where that works entirely.
Yeah, even guys like Rudy Gobert at times, I remember last playoff, would just get subbed out in the playoffs and just...
The crazy thing is, Rudy Gobert is a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, and even he is getting stretched out and played off the floor.
Yeah.
That's just...
Getting a little clowned on sometimes, but
yeah, that's just wild to me.
And this actually brings up a question. If you guys, let's say you guys are hypothetical NBA GMs, and you see this guy, and let's say he keeps the stats he has right now, or maybe he has a couple more of these crazy 20-rebound games. Let's say he goes undrafted. Do you take him under the wing? Do you put him in the organization, get him in that G League, and see if you can get your guys to develop a decent role player, or maybe just get him some skills that make him a threat outside of the paint?
What pick would we have, like, in this hypothetical situation?
Well, I mean, just in general, like, you are a GM. He went undrafted.
Oh, okay.
Is he worth a roster spot
I
for
would
G
say
League?
definitely.
If he's undrafted, I think he's probably a guy
no brainer.
Yeah, it's like the same thing with like Luka Garza.
Okay,
like
yeah,
I feel like
that's fair.
they were kind of in similar spots. I
Can't even imagine the numbers Zach Edey would put up in the G.
Yeah.
With that size.
It's just he's one I'm not too sure about, quite frankly.
Hot take. Can I get a hot take from you, Brandon?
I mean, I don't know.
Is that a hot take?
I guess maybe, but
I mean, we've already talked about how you can be 7'4" and still suck. So,
I mean, it's just like, okay, have you guys heard of Stephen Bradley? Dude was like
Sean Bradley?
Yeah, Sean Bradley. That's what I meant. He was like 7'7" or something like that. Played for the Mavs. I want to say he was a first pick, and his career did not go.
Was it injury or was he just not it?
I think it was kind of a little bit of both. But like, even when he did play, it was like he wasn't really doing anything crazy. He wasn't playing up to these wild expectations. Okay, excuse me. He was actually the second pick in the 93 draft. But it's just like, I think just because you're 7'4" or like 7'7", that doesn't always mean that you're going to have, crazy stats when you get to the league.
Yeah, I mean,
so,
and I don't think he would, which is why I feel like the only place he'd really fit in an NBA team would be rebounding, or not rebounding, but as a rotational piece. But yeah, I mean, like, any more thoughts on this guy? I mean, he's just we've been watching him silently. I mean, we haven't really brought him up a lot on the podcast, but we've been watching him silently, and he's risen and fallen. I mean, risen a little bit, falls a little bit, but he's just kind of...
I'm just going to close with, it really just depends on the era. If this were the 90s, yes. But
Fair enough.
Today...
Imagine Zach Edey going up against Shaq.
That's
true.
something we would
true.
see. Like, there were more guys like Zach Edey, probably not as tall, but that was basically, the type of game that they had. And like I said before, if this were the 90s, he'd be a top 5, top 10. Maybe even, who knows, he'd probably be going after Victor. I don't like, that's just...
Victor would not be a number 1 pick in the 90s, I don't think.
Yeah, that probably is true because how much they valued paint presence and him. They just didn't want big shooting outside of the paint. So that is a good point, Jake. But
So you think Zach Edey over Victor in the 90s?
You never know, but that could have been a storyline that would have happened. So you never know. But moving on, we still have one guy, and this is probably the most talked about player in all of high school sports, maybe even in just amateur sports, period. But Bronny James still has not committed to a school. And we haven't heard of he's probably going to go here, or, he's probably going to, we haven't really heard any serious, rumors that have like real validity behind him. Like, he's still just a question mark.
Yeah, the crystal ball is still pretty murky right now.
Nobody knows where this kid is going to go except for him. And we may not know until as late as March. So I just kind of want to play a little what if. Where would we like to see Bronny go here at League Bound?
This one's obvious for me, but I want to hear you guys first.
Well, you could go two different ways here, because obviously with us here at UNL, getting Bronny to a Big Ten school like Ohio State would be very entertaining, just so that we could get to see him live and get a little bit of good coverage here on the show. But personally, I think it would be really fun if he does go to Memphis to follow along with Mikey Williams and kind of reconnect that blue, what was it, Blue Chips or
Blue Chips,
team, or AAU team. Kind of, that's almost where Mikey Williams got his fame started up, by putting huge numbers up with Bronny James. So that would be almost poetic to see them come together again.
I was going to say, for storylines and like a narrative purpose, I would love to see that, just to see those guys reunite. I remember watching their mixtapes back in the day, and seeing Mikey ball out was fun. And I would love to see them, just bring back some childhood nostalgia. But I think an important thing is, I don't know like what this would mean in terms of his college selection, but he actually signed a NIL deal with Nike. And I think one thing to note is that Mikey had that deal with Puma, but Puma doesn't have any, they don't have any like D1 colleges that are with Puma. So I think he could just kind of go wherever. But Bronny, and Nike's obviously one of like the biggest college sponsors in terms of apparel. Mm-hmm. So I think since he has this deal with Nike, he may be a little bit limited in theory in where he wants to go play in terms of college. So I think that could be something. But other than that, we still have no leads. So,
and at the from 247 Sports, he is listed he's ranked 44th, I think, nationally 44th, and from 44 up, he's pretty much one of like 5 people who haven't committed so far.
And you have to wonder why, like, a top 50 prospect only knowingly having offers from a couple of schools. It's kind of strange. Like,
and with the caliber of Bronny James, I mean, he's gonna make your school money just by attendance numbers.
Like,
I mean,
there's been players who are way lower ranked that have almost double-digit offers from D1 schools. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of strange. You have to imagine it's more of the off-the-court stuff that schools are looking at. Not anything bad, obviously, but just bringing in that type of personality to your university. It's kind of a dated mindset, in my opinion, but still going on today.
I think too, it's just interesting that, because he's the type of player where I feel like, and he has a lot of hype, but he's not a guy who's gonna hog the ball. Like, he's not he's a smart basketball player. That's like one of the things that, has him as high as he is. And so I think that more schools aren't looking at a player with such a high basketball IQ and just plays the game the right way. Especially when you look at in terms of the NCAA, it is a little bit baffling to me. And I'm wondering if maybe they probably know something that we don't, quite frankly. But it makes me think, like, man, is he just set on the G League and he hasn't finalized anything? Mm-hmm. But I'm interested to see where he goes. And I'm hoping that as the season goes on, we see him get a little bit more offers, because I really want this to spice up, just so we can talk about it.
Yeah, I know. Did you have something?
No, you go ahead.
So, I mean, I haven't said. Did you say you wanted to see him go to Memphis too?
Memphis or Ohio State, I think, would be.
So, I do really like the Memphis narrative, but the selfish person in me really wants to see that man play in person. Oh. And as students of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, that means he would come to Lincoln, Nebraska, in the middle of nowhere. But he would come here, and we would go probably 3-4 hours early to go see him.
And you can't forget, it does say here that USC is also on the list, which USC is coming to the Big Ten pretty soon as well.
Yeah,
so.
that's
Pretty soon. I don't think they'll be here by the time Bronny's in and out, because he'll easily be a one and done, right?
There's
never know.
some debate because, people all across the board think differently, but I think a lot of scouts think that he might be a 2-year guy just because he's someone who he comes his first year, he might not play that much just because, the way the rotations work. And like when he comes to college, most of the people on that roster will probably be better than him his first year. But I don't think he'll be a 4-year guy, but 2 or 3 is where I see him. So I think if he goes to USC or UCLA, because I think UCLA, they haven't offered him, but they have shown interest. And he has some teammates who've played there or are playing there right now, like Amari Bailey, and there was one other guy. But if he goes to USC or UCLA, those would still be opportunities for us to see him play.
Yeah, and there's been other guys who are in that kind of 50-ish ranked player. I just remember someone like Lester Quinones, who initially committed to Memphis a couple of years ago. I think he's actually now playing with Ignite. I want to say I saw him playing there, but he was one of these kind of top 50 players, potential to go one and done, and ended up not really going like the way he thought. So you never really know with these guys. I mean, we see guys who are not even ranked in the top 100 go rise up in college and have really good careers. I think, was Ochai even a top 100 player?
No,
I don't think so.
He was a 3-star.
Yeah.
Same with Christian Brown. So
It's all over the place.
And yeah, you see that a 2-year option, I mean, is LeBron. Because we know, and if you haven't heard it before, and if I'm correct, I could be completely spitballing off rumors, but I'm pretty sure LeBron said something that he wants to retire, or he wants, wherever Bronny goes, he wants to go there and play like a season or 2 before he retires with his son. And I think that alone probably rises his draft stock as well. But also, with that in mind, would he take a 2-year option? I mean, I guess it's his interest, not his dad's. And I'm assuming LeBron would probably let his son choose what he wants to do. But
knowing LeBron, he's waited this long. I feel like he'll be able to, and especially with the way he hasn't like fallen off.
he hasn't regressed really.
Yeah, I think he'll be able to like.
He's adapted to his age.
Yeah,
so.
I think he'll be able to, and like too. I feel like LeBron, like just from what I've seen, and like all the social media and stuff, he seems like he wants Bronny to come to the league, but I feel like he wouldn't want him to do it at the expense of his development, if that makes sense. Like have him go in too early and miss out on.
Because LeBron's smart too, and he wants the best for his kids. So,
and like I said, I don't think Bronny's going to be playing all 4 years of college, but I think I don't know if he'll be a one and done, quite frankly.
Interesting.
And one thing that could kind of fast track Bronny to the NBA is more likely than not, he'll probably sign with Rich Paul and Clutch Sports, who has a lot of connections in the NBA built up over the years because of LeBron. So some of those connections could go deep enough to get Bronny in the one and done type of scenario.
And let me entertain one more idea, because I don't think we talked about it yet, but let me hear it about G League, because that's also a possibility. Has he gotten offered by the G League yet?
I'm sure they've probably. I don't know if they like publicly.
Yeah, I don't think it gets publicly.
They're not publicly.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Like they're going after him.
Yeah.
Like there's without a doubt.
I also don't even think the G League Ignite has like recruitment letters. I think it's almost more of a mutual. It's basically like a contract signing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if Bronny wants to go to the G League Ignite, they're gonna sign him, because the whole point of that team is to develop players. So, I mean, they're not going to just disregard Bronny one.
And not only that, but like that's fantastic marketing for a still relatively new and growing organization. So they would totally take him. But whether he wants to go is up to the question. But I mean, yeah, it's heated debate here with Bronny James on really where he'll go. I mean, we'd like to see him go to Ohio State. We'd like to see him go to Memphis, but he could really go anywhere. No one really knows.
Before we leave this segment, I'm looking at On3 Sports, which is part of like their rankings. They put people's NIL value. Isaiah Collier, the number 1 player, has a $560,000 NIL value, And Bronny at 41 has 7.5 million.
Wow.
And I would just like to leave that there.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, do you think that's coming out of a local businesses' pockets, or do you think Nike's gonna, or like Nike or like a big brand like that would be like, hey, $7 million to go play for Ohio State or something like that?
It's probably factoring in both. I think his deal with Nike is like the one that he has now. I want to say is like 10 mil, and then which that doesn't really add up with the. But then it's probably got like some of the local businesses added in as well. So.
That's just so crazy to me.
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with how much reach he has in kind of a couple of different aspects. Like, he's obviously big in basketball. I know a couple of years ago, he was pretty big in like the video game realm. He was doing magazine
streaming?
covers.
Was he live streaming for a bit too?
Yeah.
I saw him doing an ad for God of War like a few weeks.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that, yep.
So that's just
So he's really all over the place. He's Patrick Mahomes-esque in all the commercials now.
Take LeBron out of the equation, what he's made already before he's gotten to college probably already has him set for life.
It's only a matter of time before he gets a Fortnite skin.
Oh, yeah.
LeBron has one already, right? Or
I mean,
does
it's
he not have
Bronny.
one?
I'm talking about Bronny.
Oh, Bronny himself.
Yeah. The LeBron does have one. That's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
All right, we're starting to get a little sidetracked here, so let's move on to Jabari Smith.
32 minutes? Yeah, let's...
Jabari
Smith, welcome to the league. Branden, he's kind of been hitting his stride as of late. Let's get into what we've seen from JSJ.
Well, Jabari, he's just been doing what he's been doing at Auburn. He's been playing alongside Jalen Green, Kevin Porter, and I think he's kind of coming into his role as starting off as a role player and then building up from there. But, he's just hitting, open threes and playing, the game that we saw at Auburn. And I remember I said a while back, like, he's going to be a player. It just takes time, and we're slowly seeing him, start to figure it out. So Jabari, we're happy for you. We're rooting for you. And I genuinely want to see the Houston Rockets play some meaningful basketball, because I do think they have a fun roster. And when you have that dunk threat in Jalen Green, Kevin Porter, who can get some fancy buckets, and then Jabari, who can just kill you in a lot of ways, like, this is a fun team.
Yeah, two things here on this segment. I'm really proud of how strong mentally Jabari Smith has been, because coming into the league with kind of three-point shooting and catch and shoot being one of your biggest strengths, it can be tough at times to adjust to the higher level of play, I would assume, because if you're not hitting shots and you're playing with grown men who, like, their life is on the line, like, this is their career, this is their job, you have to be so mentally strong to not get shook anytime you go out there like, oh, damn, I was 0 for 5 last night, 2 for 5 the other night. Like, I might not want to be shooting so much. But the way he's able to go out there and just continue to put shots up from three, I mean, he's over 40% in his last 10 games, so he's starting to put it together. But I love what you said about wanting Houston to play some meaningful basketball coming up soon, maybe even playoffs in the next few years, because it's always talked about how teams in the playoffs, you need to have at least one of those guys on your roster that can just go ballistic and win you a game by themselves. We've seen Donovan Mitchell do it in the past. LeBron James has done it a million times. Steph Curry. I really feel like Jalen Green is one of those guys that once you put him in a playoff format, he has the offensive bag to put the team on his back, put up 40, put up 50. He's that type of scorer.
Yeah, and I think, too, he's a player who he's going to make Jabari's job a lot easier, because he's going to draw so much attention. And Jabari is like one of the more ideal players you could have. Just somebody who, when Jalen doesn't have anything, he kicks it out, he can just throw it right up and it'll go in. And Jabari, he has the potential to create a little bit of his own as well. And I think Jabari's development is going to be interesting to watch. But going back to what you said about mental toughness, I think that's something, him just showing that he can improve here early on in the season is a good sign for his development as a whole. Because one of the hardest things, I think, for NBA prospects, even though I'm not in the NBA, is most of the times they have had it easy, like, their whole lives, because they've just been better than everyone the minute they've stepped onto the court. They might have had to learn like a little bit of, mental basketball IQ things. But for Jabari, where right now he's pretty equal with everybody else, and him just showing that he can improve, I think is a good sign for the Rockets as a whole and himself. And now we will be moving on to prospect breakdown. And today, as Jake talked about earlier, we are covering one of the hottest players in college basketball right now, and Branden Miller. Branden Miller, it is your time, my guy. A 6'9" forward, 200 pounds, 20 years old, so he's one of the older players in the draft, but he's averaging 19 points, 8 rebounds, and he's shooting 46% from 3 through 8 games.
It's crazy to hear you say 20 years old, so he's one of the older prospects in this draft, and we're like, ooh, I'm like the same age now. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's getting there. Dreams are dying, but anyway, it looks like he's going to be the best shooter in the draft, just because of the size that he has and the fact that nobody can really contest this guy, and he just seems like a naturally gifted shooter.
Yeah, I mean, the release, you look up on the film, his release it's pure, it's water. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of Bryce McGowan's from last year. He's got great backspin, and a lot of times you see these guys who are good shooters, but they're kind of bigs, and their form's a little bit, whack, honestly. It doesn't have a lot. I mean, I remember watching Jaren Jackson at Michigan State. He was a good shooter, but I mean, he was like elbows out, no spin on the ball.
Now,
it was like
he's like lean. Even now, it's still a little bit, but yeah.
But watching Branden Miller, like he's a legit shooter at 6'9", which is just really impressive to look at.
I think too. I think just looking at their tools and like just kind of their scout comparisons, he reminds me a lot of Michael Porter Jr. But I think he's longer than Michael Porter Jr., which I think is really gonna be beneficial for him, just because he gets his shot off better, and I think too he has a little bit of a shot creation ability, and I think if he improves that when he gets to the league, that's gonna be potentially a scary sight.
What would you say about the North Carolina game a couple of weeks ago now? I mean, 4 for 21. The Branden Miller haters, they were out for that game because they're like, this guy's trash.
That, I will say, it was a tough game, but I feel like there were a good bit of looks that he just missed. Like, I know coming into, like when he was in high school, he was regarded as more of a mid-range guy than really an outside shooter. And I think that's why he was only like 14th in the top 100. And I think he's still maybe having to adjust to that a little bit. But I think as he gets more reps and he just kind of conditions himself, he'll become kind of more of a 3-point guy. But I think the fact that he still has a mid-range shot, a lot of people talk about how that's a dying art of the game. But I think just because he's a 6'9" guy and he's not like somebody who's like a 6'3" guard, it's still a high percentage shot for him. So I think that's something that you can keep working into the offense for him at the next level.
I think the response to how he played versus North Carolina would be that they were lucky he was 4 for 21, because if he was actually on in that game, North Carolina would have been basically blown out of the game. I mean, that game went, I think, 4 overtimes, the last, before it was over. And I believe Alabama ended up winning the game anyways. But if Branden Miller actually had a good scoring game, I mean, they would have blown, what were they, number 1 in the country at that point? Mm-hmm. They would have blown that team out by like 15, 20 points because of how good Branden Miller was. So, yeah, I mean, it just goes to show how much his impact is for the Crimson Tide this year. Now,
UNC has fallen out of the top 25, but that's still a tough performance. And I think that was one of his first games against Power 5. So for me, I kind of look at it as like that was one of his first real games. But even against Michigan State that he played the day before, I want to say, or it might have been 2 days before, he showed that he's gonna be a threat. He had, hold on while I look it up.
What are you looking for?
It was the Michigan State. Michigan State, he had 24 points on 57% shooting from 3, and I think, as the season goes on, he's just he's gonna figure out how to play against some of these better teams. And it's not like he's struggling. Like he's still, doing some damage. And I think he's going to potentially be that number 3 pick in this year's draft.
It'll be interesting. I mean, 6'9", but he's got a handle, right? Like, that's what makes those franchise players, those number 1 player on a championship team, those guys that can play defense against virtually anyone on the court and be elite at it, but also be able to get the ball at the end of a shot clock, put it on the floor, and find a good shot. He's not just a catch and shoot guy. I don't really like that it almost seemed like we pigeonholed Jabari Smith into a catch and shoot guy, or at least I did earlier on this episode. That's not what he is, but Branden Miller for sure is a shot creator, not just a catch and shoot 3-point guy. Even though his percentages would make you think he is, I think he's over 45% from 3-point range, and he's actually really good at the free throw line. I know that was something we were talking about a little bit earlier.
Yeah, 80%. I think one thing scouts look at is to see if you're really a shooter is just what that free throw percentage looks like. Because you could go through shooting woes like one season, like say you're shooting 30 to 35%. But if you're shooting like a solid 80% from the free throw line, that shows that you can develop as a shooter. And right now, through his first 8 games, he's shooting about 80%, and there's a chance that could go up. There's a chance that could go down. But I think just what he's shown is that he's a legit shooter, like you talked about earlier with his form. Like, everything points to the fact that he's going to do some high-level damage at the next level.
And his game kind of reminds me a little bit of current-day Paul George. I haven't seen too much of like the high-flying dunks that we saw from like prime Paul George so far in the college season, but I mean, Paul George right now is still like a top 20 player, really good shooter. He can play the 2 or the 3. I think that could be where Branden Miller kind of fits in the NBA. And he also, I would say his floor coming into the league is somewhat of like a Cam Reddish type of player on the wing. He might not get a ton of minutes right away as like the number 1 offensive weapon if he goes to a team like Charlotte, like he's listed to here. LaMelo Ball is going to have the ball in his hands for so much of that game. So he's got to make sure he's got the catch and shoot game down, kind of like how Cam Reddish fits into a team right now.
I will say, I know I talked about how he can create a little bit off of his handle, but to me it still looks a little bit, it looks like it needs to be a little bit more polished just off of first glance. And I say that mainly because just watching some of his highlights and some of the moves he makes, they aren't very quick moves. You know, like, I feel like the one thing he doesn't have like crazy athleticism. Like, he's probably one of the slower players in this draft class. And he's not like sluggish or anything, but it's just like, you look at some of the other top guys, like the Thompson twins, even Scoot Henderson, Whitmore probably. That I think
Dylan Mitchell.
Yeah, they all they're just known for their athleticism. And I think Branden, that's really not what he's known for at all. But if he can improve his shiftiness and creation, then yeah, I think he'll definitely be a lethal threat at the next level. But I think the one thing that's it's hard for me to fully say that he'll be the 3rd player just because I don't know how his handle and his creation ability will translate as of now.
Well, also, even outside of him, we got into it a little bit earlier today, but guys like Nick Smith and Cam Whitmore are finally returning to the court. So we'll see if they put together impressive seasons to kind of overtake what we've seen from Branden Miller so far, because he has definitely benefited from the lack of these like preseason top 5 guys being in there, and he's really put his name into that top 5.
Yeah, I think just the main thing about him, the main takeaway is he just has such a high floor, and it's really hard to see a situation where, he's not, making some kind of impact. So I think Branden Miller he's a great prospect, and I'm kind of excited to see where he gets drafted to, just because I think that's probably my favorite part of this podcast, just talking about where guys end up.
And actually really bouncing right off of that, I normally ask you guys where you guys think he would go, where you guys think he would go best, or maybe even like what pick you guys think he will, and you guys say he's a top 5. But today I kind of want to spin the narrative and make you guys take some hot takes. Who would you take him over?
Ooh, okay.
Who would you take Branden Miller over in this year's draft?
I would take him over. I know Azar Thompson's been shooting well for overtime, but I think I'd probably take him over him. Probably Dylan Mitchell. And I'm still not sure about Keontae George. Jarris Walker, ooh. That is tough. But I'd probably take him over a good majority of that top 10. It's the main guys it's hard for me to decide are Amin Thompson, Nick Smith, and Cam Whitmore.
Sure.
Just because they have higher ceilings than probably...
Tankathon, oh, sure. Tankathon currently has Branden Miller listed, predicted going 5th overall, but that can change over the whole season, and that's not always 100% accurate with GMs and who they want. But yeah, what do you think, Jake?
Some of the similar guys like Brandon was talking about, he's up there with the Thompson twins for me. I might take Asar over him still just because, I mean, there's really not that much drop-off from Amen and Asar. They're very similar players, both have similar strengths, and they have more of that NBA athleticism that kind of get to the rim and finish over what we've seen from Branden Miller. But I almost look down a little bit farther into the draft at some of these guys that I think by the end of the season will probably be up into that top 10, potentially even top 5 if their season continues. Like Kyle Filipowski, I think basically a 6'11" guy that can really do it all. I mean, per 36 minutes, he's averaging just under 20 points and 12 rebounds per game. That's really impressive stuff. And he's got a 3-ball. I think Kyle Filipowski could get up there. Honestly, even Grady Dick. I mean, I know it's going to be tough at this point in the season for someone to say Grady Dick should get drafted over Branden Miller, but Grady Dick has one strength, and it's shooting the ball, and he's doing it basically better than any freshman in the country other than Branden Miller. They're both kind of at that 45-ish% from 3, so it really could be up to whatever team's value. So maybe they'll value Branden Miller's better defensive kind of capabilities at a bigger size than what Grady Dick brings, but you never know with these teams, man.
You know what GMs like the most about these guys, though? Their age. And you know what? Asar Thompson, couple months younger.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
Makes a big difference to GMs for whatever reason, man.
This is slightly off topic, but I didn't realize that the Thompson twins are about to be 20 years old, and they're essentially still playing high schoolers.
And they're still hooping against high schoolers.
That's like interesting to me. I didn't realize that.
And you know what? The Thompson twin prospect breakdown will be its own thing. And I'm sure we'll probably bring that up quite a couple times, and that'll be a pretty heated discussion. But back to Branden Miller. So we talked about who you guys would probably take over him, who you guys like who you guys like under him, or who you think he is better than in this draft, or a better prospect. But let's bounce back to it. Where would you guys love to see him go? Where would you love to see him play?
This top, I'll say top 8 for right now, just because there's a lot of movement that could go around. There's one team that I don't really want to see him go to, and that is Detroit, just because they already have Sadiq Bey, who I think is not necessarily a franchise keeper, but him and Branden Miller have very similar strengths, and I don't really see how Branden Miller would push a guy like Sadiq Bey, who would be going into his 3rd and 4th season already. I don't really see how he would push him out of the lineup. So that's one team I wouldn't like to see him go to. I honestly think Charlotte right now could be a pretty decent fit, especially with them losing Miles Bridges because of reasons we don't really like to talk about. But just giving LaMelo Ball another good shooter on the perimeter to throw the ball to, it never is going to hurt.
Yeah. And they want that lottery number 1 Victor, but we'll see whether they can get it or not.
There's also, I think for me, a team who's steadily dropping slowly, and I think we could probably see higher up in this lottery as the season goes on. But I think I'd like to see Branden Miller end up with the Wizards. It clicked.
Yep, keep going.
The Wizards.
Yes, the Wizards, because
you're off the Denny train.
I think Denny. But I feel like they're at a point now where I think they're in the worst spot you can possibly be, and I think they just need talent. And say if they don't even, I don't think they'll end up being the worst possible team in the league, but like I could easily see them falling to like that 4, 5, 6 range, especially if like somebody gets injured like Kristaps or Bradley. And if I think, if Bradley stays, which he probably will, you keep Kristaps, I think Branden could be a nice complementary piece. So
that would be a very big front court with Brandon Miller, Kuzma, and Kristaps Porzingis. That would be a lot of size and length up front that teams would probably struggle to deal with.
Yeah, and it's also not just a lot of size, but a lot of shooting today, which is probably one of the most important things in the league right now. So I think to make that kind of an interesting fit, I'd like to see that.
I think another team that could use a guy like Brandon Miller would be the Utah Jazz. They're currently sitting at just 11th because they had a really good start to the year, but they're starting to fall down a little bit, falling back to the norm that we expected them to be. But obviously the Jazz are currently just sitting in best young prospect we can get. And if they're down at maybe that 5 or 6 range, Thompson twins are gone, Scoot's gone, Victor's gone, I think they could take a chance on a guy like Brandon Miller, who definitely has that two-way kind of wing potential that we think he has.
Moving on to our trivia section, which, as you guys may know, last week we had a lot of video-related problems where trivia did not happen. This week's is going to be really interesting. We'll have to see how this works. But starting it right off. Oh, yeah, and Brandon got his first win in a while.
I did.
Last week.
Cap.
But it was off
They're lying.
Because we did record it. We did record it, but it just...
The cameras just weren't on. The cameras literally just weren't on. I literally did, but it is what it is.
He won, but the cameras weren't on. All right, and let's start it off here with who was the last second round pick to get MVP? And I kind of want to hear first person to say this because I feel like
Nikola.
someone would know. Brandon got that.
Yeah, that was quick.
That was quick.
I'm a historian, bro.
Nikola Jokic was the last second rounder to win MVP, and he was back to back.
Yeah, the last one to win it last year and the year before.
They drafted him during a Taco Bell. Oh,
And fun fact,
I'm at 5%. My battery's not charging.
oh, you want mine?
Yeah.
Quick break. Okay, bouncing back after a technical error. Okay. Nikola Jokic, the last person to be a second rounder to win MVP was like all the way back in the 60s, or like the 50s or 60s or something like that. So yeah, he's really he's the first basketball player in the modern era to be a second round MVP, which is extremely rare to see players like that.
He's probably already at least a top 3 or 4 second round pick of all time. I mean, he doesn't have a championship yet, but 2 MVPs.
Easily, yeah.
I mean, he could probably be the top second rounder because Manu, Rodman.
Which we talked about on the last trivia, but it corrupted. And yeah,
And like, there's Ben Wallace, but I can't think of any other.
It's really all about if you value championships or MVPs more. I mean, two MVPs is pretty astounding. Not a lot of players even have 1 MVP, let alone 2 back-to-back.
But I feel like just the star power that he has alone, like.
Yeah. All right, moving on. This guy's been in the headlines a lot. Who was the 7th overall pick in the 2017 NBA draft?
Wait, say that again?
2017, the 7th overall pick. I can give you the team he originally got drafted to. I kind of spoiled it. He's not on that team anymore.
2017.
Let me give you a hint that's a little bit vague. He's been on the rise.
Bag.
He's been on the rise.
Oh, is it Anunoby? OG Anunoby?
No, because Brody just said he's not on the same team that drafted him.
Oh, that's right.
So I was going to guess Malik Monk, but that might be too old.
All right, let me give you guys one more hint, and if you can't get it then no one gets it. He was originally drafted to the Bulls.
It's Lauri Markkanen.
Bro, I was about to say that.
It's 1-1. 1-1. He got that
It's all right.
at the Bulls. Lauri Markkanen on the rise recently with the Jazz, as we just talked about.
I'm not scared.
Man's been hooping. He hooped with the Cavs for a bit too, but
a little bit.
People know him most now because he's getting the Jazz up. Up big. All right. And third and final question here. Let's see who walks away with it. Actually, this one can't even really be a point based because I was just really interested in hearing your wild guesses and
So we're having another tie?
stipulations towards. We'll see here if you can guess it. What does the NBA do if the lottery ping-pong ball system breaks? They have this whole like list of like backups, like when the president passes away or something. They're very formal with it.
They have a lottery cabinet. That's interesting.
When the lottery ping pong ball system breaks, what does the NBA do first?
Do they go back to the folders in like the little bingo ball thing?
Is it like a coin flip or something?
Okay. Let me give you the first. Well, let me give the first one. So they actually have 2 ping pong ball systems, but for whatever reason they don't have 3. So if the power goes out or the second ping pong ball system breaks, what do? I'll have both of you guys make a guess, and then if someone's like relatively close, I'll give it to you.
I already used my guess. I have no idea.
What were you guessing there?
Well, back in the day when they first started doing it, they had like the big folders. Now they kind of just show the folders on TV that are already determined. They had like the crank thing with all the folders. That's my guess. Folded corner. What was it? Bent corner for the Knicks.
Yeah, that
Frozen
theory.
envelope.
Stern was corrupt. I'm just kidding. He wasn't. But anyway, I'm just gonna stick with my flip of the coin guess because I like Jake. I don't know what else.
Flip of a coin.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't know what else would be.
I figured you guys wouldn't get it, but I thought this was so interesting. So if the second machine also happens to break or there's a power outage, the NBA has another contingency, a basketball with a hole cut in the top. An official would then draw balls by hand. Luckily, the league has never needed to use the decapitated basketball for backup, which would produce blazing hot conspiracy takes if it ever came to pass.
Yeah, that definitely would.
But yeah, it's kind of just a really weird fact. I saw somewhere where they have 2 lottery like randomizing machines, and
I mean that's cool and all, but am I hearing we ended on another tie?
You guys ended on a tie. But hey, you did not lose. You didn't take that L today.
Okay.
That's like a World Cup finish.
Exactly. You know, like the U.S. and the UK.
In my eyes, it's another loss, so it is what it is. But
with the cameras on, you're winless so far.
No, with the cameras off, I'm probably the greatest player of all time. Don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted. But
man,
they'll just never know because the cameras are off. So it's like
it's true.
Yeah, that wraps it up here. I think here on League Bound.
Yeah, 100%. But bit of a long one.
Yeah, make sure you guys follow us all on social media. You can check me out on Instagram and Twitter at Jacob Schrantz.
You can follow me on Twitter at Branden_Blue25 and on Instagram at Branden.Blue with 2 E's.
You can follow me at Brody Wilken on Twitter, at Broderick Wilken on Instagram. What?
Little sleepy there, bud?
Yawn into the intro.
Yawnus.
We had some struggles getting this podcast together. It took like 2 hours before we could start. But it's all right. My socials are in the description. Follow us on Leaguebound on Twitter is just at _Leaguebound_. Our YouTube channel is Leaguebound, and our Spotify is also Leaguebound. You can listen to our podcast on Spotify too. No one's really listening to it on there, so you could be a first. We got voting polls on there weekly. You can give us your opinion and what you think about our takes, and give your own takes.
And make sure you guys subscribe as well on YouTube because that really just helps us grow and continue to spread out this content to the people who don't get to see it every day because they don't see it pop up.
The people who need it.
They need it. They need us.
You want it, we got it.
All your draft, NBA draft information, prospects, and all. Leaguebound Podcast. Have a good one, everyone. Have a good morning. Have a good day. Have a good night. Goodbye.
Let's go.
Recording stopped.
That was kind of sick. You just stopped it?
I stopped it.